sometimes that type of turnaround, it takes a few years. So I think the question now is, how much improvement do we expect to see from the Commanders this year? Because obviously last year they were falling on hard times. Not only were they losing games, they also had the worst point differential in the entire NFL. So when they were losing games, they were losing by a lot. And some of that falls on their defense. They gave up a ton of points. But I will say they have some massive upgrades at some key positions. Obviously, the one that, jumps off the page is Jayden Daniels. Will he be the face of the franchise in Washington? He clearly has some great things on film. The guy can scramble. He has an electric arm, and he's super athletic. So, Jenks, let's start there. Do we think Jayden Daniels is showing signs of being the guy in D.C.?
It sure feels that way. And I'll tell you why. First of all, the caveat is this. It is the preseason, okay? I get it. Last year at this time, everyone was excited about Sam Howell. But Jayden Daniels is clearly a much better athlete. And also, Sam Howell was sort of anointed by the fans because everyone was so desperate for a winner at quarterback. But Jayden Daniels is doing it. When he first got here, he was already becoming the first guy in the building. And I know it sounds like a cliche. Oh, he's the first guy. He's really the first guy in the building. And then he's been asked questions like, what's it like to be a star quarterback in the NFL? And his answer has been, and I'm paraphrasing here, I haven't done anything. I'm a rookie. I haven't even played yet. And then he walked into last week's game against the Jets in the Meadowlands wearing a Doug Williams jersey, paying an homage to the past, to the Redskins. Doug Williams, Super Bowl winning quarterback, a legend here. So this is a guy who just makes every right move. He seems to get it. And then he goes in the game, and again, small sample size, goes in there, checks down on a play he doesn't like, throws a bomb deep, runs into the end zone. Every move he's made thus far says he understands the work that it takes, and he certainly has the talent. And even in training camp, look, he's going to be the starter this year. But that was not a guarantee. That's why they brought in Marcus Mariota to maybe be that guy. We're in number 0, and it became pretty clear early on that Jayden Daniels is far and away the better choice here, and he's going to start. They haven't made it official yet, but he's going to be that guy. So, again, it's early, but if you're talking about trending in the right direction, he is definitely that guy.
Yeah, it feels like he's doing all the right things. But I think the question mark I have about Jayden Daniels is, can he stay healthy? Because we know for running quarterbacks in the NFL, especially guys who are not particularly huge, because Jayden Daniels, he's not tiny, but he's not, bulky. I feel like he could maybe gain some weight. And maybe you can testify to this, because I haven't seen him in person. You've been there at training camp and stuff. But do you think this is a valid concern for a young quarterback who likes to run the football?
Yes, I think it is. And I thought it was funny. I read this before the draft when I was doing draft prep and just learning about different guys and their strengths and weaknesses. And the number one question that scouts had for Brian Kelly when they went to LSU in regards to Jayden Daniels was, hey, can he slide? Can he slide? Can he get down? And which is a valid question. He's not small, but he's not huge. You don't want him taking hits. And you know how it is with these college athletes. Obviously, guys are bigger in the NFL, but they're fearless, these college quarterbacks, right? They don't mind taking hits. But when you get to the NFL, it's clearly different. And who was it? Was it Tua that had to learn to slide? Who was the quarterback that didn't know how to slide?
Tua.
Yeah. And
he didn't know how to fall.
That's
and they
what
had
it
to
was.
teach him how to fall to avoid concussions. He needs to make a camp out of this where he teaches young quarterbacks. Tua's class for falling. But Jayden Daniels, he's 6'4", but he's only 210. So we'll see. I feel like this is a very viable concern for somebody, especially when your franchise had a case of this with RG3, somebody who burst onto the scene as a rookie quarterback, looked amazing, but had injury concerns the rest of his career. Jenks, I want to ask you about the win total, because from a betting standpoint, I feel like you can find value in some of these teams that DC's not a mid-market team by any standard, but it does feel like a team that's kind of flown under the radar, especially when you play in the division with the Cowboys and the Eagles, who are looking at their best right now. So the win total is set for 6.5 for the Commanders. Looking at the schedule, it feels very palatable. They get to play the NFC South. They get to play several teams with losing records coming into this year, from last year. Do you think this Commanders team can get to 7 wins?
I do. And it's not an expensive price either. The over is -125. Now, I don't think they're going to blow past 6.5. I think they can get to 7 or 8. And look, if they get to 8, that's that's double the wins than they had compared to last season. They went 4-13 last year. That would be a massive improvement. Improvement in the NFL generally comes in baby steps. You look at the Texans, they're an anomaly. So when you're comparing everyone to that, it's like that's not really fair. We don't normally see that. But yes, when you talk about the schedule, it's not a gift, but it's about middle of the road, maybe one of the weaker schedules in the NFL. There's a lot of winnable games in there. And honestly, as much as we focus on the offense when it comes to the Commanders, and I certainly understand why when you have a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, it's that defense that is going to be vastly improved. They brought in Bobby Wagner, and when you think of Bobby Wagner, maybe you think of a guy who is a little bit past his prime. Bobby Wagner led the NFL in tackles last season. It's remarkable. This is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's going to be right there in the middle. They signed Frankie Louvu from the Panthers, who is supremely underrated. So immediately they got better on defense. They do have some issues in the secondary, but they signed Jeremy Chin as well. That defensive line last year struggled at times, but they still have Deron Payne, John Allen, and also they have a new defensive coordinator. And a lot of these defensive guys have said last year, because of the scheme that we ran under Ron Rivera, we had to think a lot. Now we don't have to think. We can just react. So I think by virtue of the fact that Washington had the worst point differential in the NFL last year, they just could not stop anybody defensively. This year is going to be different, and I think that is actually what propels them to over 6.5.
Well, it also starts with the top. Dan Quinn, a defensive guy and a defensive-minded head coach. So just starting from there, this is probably the weak area for the Commanders last year. Like, obviously, there were a lot of things wrong. But still, if you can, at least stay competitive in some of these games, maybe Jayden Daniels gives you a shot at the end of it to win some of these games. But I think the biggest predictor of success for young quarterbacks can be the team around him. Do you think the Commanders have enough pieces around Jayden Daniels to kind of propel him to a decent season? Because he can't do it all by himself.
Yeah, I actually do. Look, the pieces they put around him are pretty nice. They put him in a good position. The real bugaboo is going to be on the offensive line. They have some holes there. They're not very deep. They're kind of banged up right now. They need Brandon Coleman to get healthy. They drafted him to come in out of TCU and maybe be that guy on the left side. And he's not too injured, but they're trying to get right before the season. They can't afford a lot of injuries. However, when you look at the weapons around Jayden Daniels, he has Austin Eckler, a guy who can do it all if he can stay healthy. But the main bell cow is Brian Robinson Jr., who says he's in the best shape of his life. I know a lot of athletes say that, but this is a guy who, remember, he had those gunshots. He was shot in the middle of the season and lucky to be alive, and so it took him a while to get right again. He's a very physical running back. And then they have a fantastic receiver in Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz, who has looked great during the offseason. Cliff Kingsbury is the new offensive coordinator, and Zach played for Cliff out in Arizona, but he's healthy as well. That's a good veteran presence as well at tight end. So there are enough pieces for Jayden Daniels that if he can sort of circumvent or dance around that offensive line enough, I think he can have a nice season, at least nice enough to hit that win total. So the Commanders have done a good job of putting talent around him. He's not coming into an empty cupboard.